right, everybody. I'm excited about this guest. I feel like I'm going to learn a lot today with Ben Brown. Ben Brown is a TikTok star, a comedian, and he has a familiar last name. So if you watch the Sister Wives franchise, you probably are very familiar with the Brown family, and he is, in fact, a relative. He's Kody Brown's nephew. So, and Ben, you popped up on my FYP page on TikTok, and I'm like, I gotta talk to this guy. Like, you were so open. You were so brave on your TikTok. I mean, I think it's brave. I don't know how you're going to feel after season 19 of Sister Wives, because you're sort of torturing yourself, I guess, by watching Sister Wives, the show, for the very first time, and as a relative, giving your perspective.
Yeah, I guess that is what I'm doing. I guess I'm a glutton for punishment. I really need to just be in pain.
I think I instantly took to you because you're a comedian in Utah. You're in Salt Lake City, right? Is that where you're?
Yeah, I live here in Salt Lake City. I started stand-up just a little over 3 years ago, and I'm kind of like building my brand, building my skill, just getting ready to kind of break out into the big world.
I love it. How did you start comedy? Like, I moved out here. I was telling you before we started, I moved out here 2 years ago to LA. There was kind of this guy, Jerry Katzman, that has this like cult comedy course, that a lot of people do. So I did that, and, they sort of teach you a writing method. How do you write your jokes?
Yeah, so I actually didn't know, I didn't know that stand-up comedy was a thing until I was like 22. And when I went to college and somebody played I went to like a party or something, and someone was playing I think they had a VHS of Brian Regan. And so he was the first person that I'd ever seen that had done that. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the shit. Like, this is fun. And, so it took me a couple of years. At that point, I lived in Southern Utah. There's not a great comedy scene in Southern Utah. So I moved to Salt Lake actually during the pandemic. So in 2020, I think in 2020, a lot of shit broke, and a lot of people were like, oh, the world is falling apart, and I don't know how much control I have over the world, but I do know that I only get to live this one life. And so I'm going to live this life doing what I want to do. And that kind of hit me in 2020. And I think it hit a lot of people. And so I was like, I'm going to pursue this. So I moved to Salt Lake. And Salt Lake doesn't have Salt Lake's not LA or New York in terms of comedy, for sure. But it is
sometimes that's an advantage,
Sometimes it's a little bit of an advantage. It's a tight community. It's a little bit, we've got good mics, we've got regular things happening, and it's a little bit easier to be in LA. I've been out to LA a couple of times. I've done some comedy in New York, and there's advantages to being in that big of a pond, and then there's disadvantages, right?
Totally.
And there's advantages of being in like a little pond. In a little pond, I can make a lot of noise. So I went up and I did my first open mic in May of 21. I kind of got into it because I would tell people stories at work. Like, I'd be at work, people find out that you're a polygamist, and it's like they instantly want to know everything about you, which has been a little bit annoying sometimes. Like, there are parts of me for sure that are like, I'm more than that, right? Like, that there's more to my humanity and personhood than how many moms I have. But it's also, a comedy is about getting attention. And so it's also a quick way to get attention. And so I would tell people stories when they would find out that I grew up polygamist, and they would usually end up being kind of funny, and they'd get people laughing, and they'd say things like, you should tell people, you should try stand-up or something. And so I did my first open mic in Salt Lake at the Wise Guys in Salt Lake. And I went up there and I killed. It was like, I got laughs I didn't even expect to get. And I came down off that, and I was like, yeah, this is the thing. Like, this is what we're going to be doing. And so, yeah, just have been chasing that ever since.
So you do talk some of your polygamy, obviously, right? I mean, your life has to be just completely, it's a one-man show, really.
Yeah, and what's interesting too is I got lucky because I was able to connect to a really experienced kind of local comic who mentored me when I first got started. And what he told me is that there was really useful advice. Is he said that it's not that I have to tell or talk about polygamy constantly, and I don't, but it is that my background, the way I was raised, has created a certain view. Like there's a certain way that I see the world that's different and unique from how anyone else would. Right. So I
Yeah.
grew up in a very small world. It was very heavily controlled. We had very strict narratives about what the outside world was like, what we were like. And so like there are a lot of things that I just don't know. Like as an example, like we just talked about it, stand-up comedy was not even in my world until I was in my 20s, right? I'm constantly like finding new, like I just listened to Nirvana for the first time like a year and a half ago. And so there's a lot of things about the world that people sort of assume that everyone knows. And to me, they're all really fresh. And so that kind of creates a really unique viewpoint that lets me kind of talk about things. So it's not necessarily that I don't want to just be a polygamous comic, but I do want to be able to show up in the world as someone who had a pretty isolating and abusive childhood, who's done a lot of work to heal from that and to kind of be in this world and to try to find the things about the world that are delightful, right? Like one of the things that I was raised to believe that the world was wicked and to be scared of the world. And when I came out, what I found mostly is that it's pretty great.
Oh, amazing, right? Amazing. And most people, 95% of everybody you meet, your neighbors are like so kind, so helpful, like give you the shirt
So
off their back.
lovely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
from any state in this country. Ben, it was funny because people probably know you too on TikTok. Fresh King Benjamin is your TikTok name. And but I saw you put that video up of like, all right, I grew up like a pliglet. Like I grew up in this polygamous family. I don't know a lot of things. What should I try? And people were giving you horrible fucking advice, like a Dr. Pepper. Let me tell you, Ben, you can skip that shit. Okay. Like, I mean, have you tried a
It's
Dr.
funny that
Pepper?
you say
It's
Dr.
so
Pepper.
bad.
Dr. Pepper's my favorite. I love Dr. Pepper.
People like go to Dairy Queen. I'm like, Dairy, you're telling
Yeah.
this man, like, go to the worst. Anyway, I'm gonna get on there and give you my suggestions.
That's funny. I wonder, now that you say that, I wonder, because I'm sort of just the eternal optimist. And so I wonder how much of that I'm gonna have to go back through and look at those comments, because now I wonder, like, I'll bet some of them are people that are like, yeah, you should totally try this. And then I'll bet there's a ton of people who are like, we should tell him to try Dairy Queen. Ha 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 ha.
Exactly. They're giving you terrible advice.
I get there and I'm like, what the fuck is this shit? Take me
Oh,
back to the compound.
the worst. Yeah, you're like, take me back.
Uh,
Ben, tell us. I mean, look, we could talk for 6 hours. We might
we
about
might.
your upbringing. I mean, okay, you were a part of this like long time. I don't know how many generations. Polygamist family. Obviously, your dad is Kody Brown's brother, who of course has been on TV talking about polygamy
Yeah.
and polygamous lifestyle for 14 years. So you are how many generations a Mormon? You're kind of a division of the Mormon church that is this.
Yeah. So the way
down.
to think about Mormonism is that 100 and almost 200 years ago in 1830, a guy named Joseph Smith, who everyone's probably heard of, you've probably seen the South Park. I wish that I would have seen the South Park before I devoted most of my young life to living that way. I would have made different life choices. But Joseph Smith starts a cult in the early 1800s, right? He tells everyone, hey, you guys, I found a golden plate. Only I can see them because they're super special. I have this rock. I can look at the rock in my hat and I can he's made all this stuff up. And a bunch of people believed him, right? Like tens of thousands of people believed him. And one of the people who believed him was my ancestor, a dude named Ebenezer Brown. And Ebenezer Brown was a first generation immigrant. So his dad grew up in Scotland and then immigrated to America.
Wow.
And then Ebenezer Brown was born in New York. So already a vulnerable population, right? You think about like first generation immigrants, they're isolated. They've left their entire network of support back in Scotland. They've come to America, and then they immediately get sucked up into one of the frankly dozens of cults that were getting started. And like, that was the whole rage of things to do, was to start cults in the 1830s. And so they get sucked up into that, and they follow they follow Joseph Smith all over. They go from Joseph Smith gets kicked out of New York. They go to Missouri, they get kicked out of Missouri. They go to Ohio, they get kicked out of Ohio. They go to Illinois. And in Illinois, Joseph Smith gets basically lynched, right? Like he doesn't get hung, but he's marrying teenagers, and all of the people around him are like, that's not cool. So we're going to throw you in jail. And then we're all going to show up at jail and kill you. Because that's how we did things back in the day.
Back then, yeah.
You know? And so that happened. When that happened, that meant that this organization, this kind of mythic culty structure that he'd created, the leader was suddenly gone. But there was still a lot of like power. There's still a lot of like value in that thing. And so ever since then, that Mormon bubble has been growing and splintering at the same time, right? So the biggest group is Brigham Young, who is one of Joseph's, he claims to be Joseph's successor, and he takes about 20 to 30,000 of the Mormons out into Utah. So you imagine like what this looks like, right, in the 1840s at this point. That means that they literally go out into the desert, right? They leave, at this point, Utah is not the United States. Utah is Mexico. So they leave the country. They go out into the middle of nowhere in Utah, and they start a theocracy, right? And that's Salt Lake City, Utah. That's and then all that. And my family goes with them. So my family goes with them. They start living polygamy publicly while they're in Utah. And my family gets right into it. So my ancestor Ebenezer, he has like 5 wives. He has like 25 kids. His kid does the same thing. And they follow that until about 1890. And in 1890, what happens is that the federal government basically shows up to Utah and is like, look, Mormon Church, you have to stop living polygamy, or we will no longer let you be a church. Like, we will shut you down. We will take all of your money. We will, which at this point it's substantial, right? Because they've been sucking tithing from people for a long time. So we'll take all of that stuff away from you if you don't stop living polygamy. And then the prophet of the church at the time, his name's Wilford Woodruff, magically has a revelation where God's like, okay, you don't have to live polygamy anymore. And so at that point, the main, what is called the mainstream, or like the LDS church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints,
okay,
which is what most people think of when they think of Mormons.
Yep.
But remember, Mormon is the umbrella. It's like Mormon is like Christian. And then there's a bunch of different flavors. There's like, you could be Catholic, you could be Presbyterian, you could be same thing. Mormon is like a big umbrella term. And then there's a bunch of different flavors of Mormon that you could be. And the biggest flavor is the LDS church. And that's what my family does. So my family follows the LDS church. They stop living polygamy. In fact, one of my ancestors on my mom's side actually abandons one of his wives, right? Like he has two wives. And when they come out and they say, hey, we're not living polygamy anymore, they're like, well, I guess we're going to have, it's him and 2 sisters. He marries 2 sisters. And he's like, well, I guess I'm only going to be able to be married to one of you. And so they sit down together and they decide that he's going to stay married to the younger one because she could have more babies. And then the older one like goes off and is by herself. So it's kind of a big change in the culture. And the whole time that that's happening, there are people who are in the Mormon culture who are saying, yeah, this prophet is a false prophet. He's fallen away from the truth, because early Mormon prophets like Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, they spoke for God, and they said, in order to get into the highest level of Mormon heaven,
right,
you have to live polygamy, right? Yeah. It is a requirement for exaltation. And so then another prophet later on is like, actually, no, it's not. Otherwise we'll lose our legal status. So there's this conflict within Mormonism of like, okay, well, who who is really talking for God,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so my family, the Browns, they stick with the LDS church, and they stick with the LDS church for about another 100 years. So from the 1890s, at the turn of the century, the LDS church tries to really modernize. So they start telling people to shave their beards. They get really into the prohibition movement. They try to become a lot less weird, right? So they're sort of like slowly jettisoning some of the weirder stuff. They whitewash a lot of their history. They tell everyone that Joseph Smith didn't look at a seer stone, that he didn't marry teenagers, like a bunch of stuff that he did do, but they try to like make it so that he didn't. And then so that's kind of the LDS. And then there's this polygamist group that is continually growing and splintering, right? So this is like, if people have probably heard of like the FLDS, the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Yep.
That's a group that splits off very early, right? So when the LDS church is like, no, we're done with polygamy, that group is like, actually, we're not done with polygamy, and we're the true prophet, right? And this is important, right? It's important to remember that at the core of this question is, who's the prophet, right? Who gets to talk for God? And whoever gets to talk for God, that's the person that we're going to follow. So there's the polygamist groups are all claiming, no, we get to talk for God. The LDS church is claiming, no, we get to talk for God. And they sort of develop into their own different cultures over the course of the 1900s, right? The 20th century. So fast forward, I know this is kind of a long way to answer this question, but you asked. So we get to fast forward to like the 1980s.
Yeah.
And in the 1980s, my family, the Brown family, is LDS.
Okay.
And they have been LDS for, at this point, six. I'm a seventh generation Mormon. So my dad is sixth. And so they've been Mormon this whole time. My dad, Kody, they serve LDS missions. And around that time, this is, if you've ever heard of or seen the show Under the Banner of Heaven.
Heard of it, have not watched it.
So there's this whole sort of thing there's sort of this resurgence in the 80s in the Mormon world on the fundamentals, right? And a big reason that happens is that, just like with polygamy in the 1890s, in the 1970s, the LDS church gets into trouble with the government again because of their doctrine of racism. So up until 1978, if you've watched like the Book of Mormon musical, in 1978, God changed his mind about Black people. What that means is, in 1978, up until 1978, the LDS church banned people who were Black from holding any kind of calling or any kind of place of authority in the church. They could not have, and they couldn't go to the temple. They could not receive the saving ordinances, right? Which was basically just a way for them to be white supremacist and racist. But with the passage of the Civil Rights Act and a lot of the sort of the integration and all of that's happening in the 60s and 70s, by 1978, the federal government was like, look, LDS church, either you stop doing this, or we're going to take away your tax exempt status. We're not going to let BYU compete, in college, sure. because of this.
Right.
And so they are like, okay, great, we'll change. So they do away with this very old doctrine that other prophets had said, no, this is an eternal doctrine. This racism thing is an eternal doctrine. And so now they're saying we're not going to do that. So that creates, in the Mormon world, that creates a lot of questions about what is the true version of Mormonism, right? Is it this new kind of fresh, less racist, less sexist kind of thing that we're turning into? Or do we go back to the fundamentals, right? Do we kind of go, it's sort of, a way that I would, something in the broader world that's maybe similar to this is like the Make America Great Again, right? That we're going to go back to this foundational old way of doing things, and that really is the way that it's supposed to be. And so my family gets kind of swept up in that in the 80s, and they start kind of studying early church leaders. They start digging into what would be called like the deeper doctrine.
Okay, so just wait, just for a refresh for everybody. So your family, like the Brown family, your grandfather, meaning
Yeah.
Cody's dad, your dad's dad, in the 70s and 80s, like when this whole change was happening, they were doing LDS, which LDS was not polygamy, right? So like was your grandfather
LDS is not polygamy. No.
okay,
Yeah.
so your grandfather, meaning Cody's dad and your dad's dad, was not a polygamist. Is that
He was
right?
not a polygamist until later, until much later in his life.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So your dad, his brother Kody are not raised like that, but then
No.
this division happens in the 80s and even within the Brown family, some members decide, "Hey, we are going to start practicing polygamy. We're going to start practicing the older way."
Exactly. Yeah. So
Okay.
so they start to dig into it and kind of they want to try to find who the true prophet is, and they end up finding the AUB, the Apostolic United Brethren, which is run by a guy named, at this point, it's probably Rulin Allred. And they're like, okay, this is the guy. And so my grandpa, my dad, one of my aunts, actually a couple of my aunts, and later my uncle Kody, they all joined the AUB. And the AUB, that's the group that Christine is raised in.
Yep.
Meri is raised in the AUB. Janelle, of the other one of the OG wives, she's raised LDS, right? So, and the reason that I want that I like to start there, and one thing that I think it's important for people to understand is that those are all of those different ways of being raised are all under the broader umbrella of the Mormon cult, right?
Yeah.
And I use that term deliberately because what I'm saying is, if you're born into the Mormon cult, you're going to make certain assumptions about how the world works and about what's important, right? And one of those assumptions that you're going to make about how the world works is that there is a prophet, meaning that there's someone on earth who is the only person that is allowed to talk for God.
Right. Now,
And
do you believe all Mormonism is a cult, or do you just think
100%. Yeah.
the whole thing, right?
The whole
So,
thing.
so
Yeah.
we see like now we see it on reality TV in many forms, right? On Bravo, I'm sure you don't watch Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, but there, some of the women are devout Mormons, a couple of them, most of them
Yeah.
are left or whatever. But okay, but you believe the whole thing is
The whole thing. Yeah.
and I mean, Ben, you're obviously very smart and you do, I'm sure, a lot in research of other religions. Is there any religion that you don't believe is a cult?
Well, so I'm using cult very specifically, right? So a cult is an organization that uses, this is Stephen Hassan's model, right? But it's an organization that uses behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control, right? So a cult is an organization that's going to try to control how people act by controlling the information that they have access to and the thoughts that they think and the emotions that they feel.
Okay, got it. Okay, got
Right?
it. So yeah,
So
so it
that's
just
how I,
depends on what, yeah, because some religions are more like that. Some are much more relaxed now, and I think probably getting more relaxed.
yeah, and I think what really happens with religion and belief is that I think that human belief is a really powerful tool. I think that as
Yeah.
humans, we have been using our ability to believe in things that aren't true, but are useful ways of understanding. I mean, science is a great example of this. Human rights, money is a great example of this, right? Like we create these fictitious things, and then we use those fictitious things to interact with each other and to cooperate. And so I think human belief, I love human belief. I think that's one of the most powerful and magical things on the planet. But what happens sometimes is that we'll get organizations or people who will say, hey, this human belief thing, I am the sole arbiter of that.
Right.
I am the one that gets to determine what is true belief and what is false belief. And every other human, you've got to filter your thing through me. And that's where you get religious abuse. That's where you get cults. That's where you get all of the negative.
So I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm assuming you're like a millennial. So you were born maybe in the 80s and your dad like his first wife, is that your biological mom?
So my dad gets married to two women at the same time.
Okay.
And I'm my mom, I'm the oldest of his second, but it's his second by like 15 minutes.
Okay.
So they kind of decided going into it so my dad was engaged to one woman and they were studying the fullness of the gospel.
Okay.
And they were like, oh, we need to wait. They felt like they needed to wait to find another person to join it with them. And so they were engaged for a while. And then they eventually found my mom. And my mom grew up LDS. And so she joined the AUB with my dad. And it was a whole thing. Like it actually kind of blew up my family. My family joining polygamy was a big fucking deal. Right. It was a big deal in the town that we grew up in, because the town that we grew up in was predominantly LDS. And my family had been kind of a big part of that. And then they left. Right. And in Mormonism, this is another way you can know something is a cult is how do they treat people who leave? So if you leave something, if you can leave something with your dignity intact, it's probably not a cult. If you can't leave something with your dignity intact, you probably were in a cult, right? And so what happened is my family joins the AUB. And by doing that, essentially what they're saying to all the LDS people in the cult is like, hey, your version of the cult is wrong. And so they react. And so there's this huge blow up and my family gets ostracized. And then what ends up happening, right, is that they have this little ranch outside of the town and they sort of circle the wagons. They kind of like isolate themselves there. That's the place where Kody's born and raised. And my dad is born and raised. But at that point they were open, right? They were interacting. It was just a farm. But then they joined this group and then it becomes this insular thing. And then I'm growing up on that. And then there's child labor happening and all of that. There's all this abuse that happens, but nobody can see it because the wider community has ostracized my family. And why did they ostracize us? Well, because we were the wrong version of the cult.
So, all right. So you're one of 16. You're born in the 80s. Your dad has at this point 2 wives, your biological one, your other mother. They're simultaneously having kids. So you're being raised like brothers, sisters, all of you guys. So what was it like when you were initially little? Were you close with like the Brown family? I'm assuming like Meri's the first wife. Then you mentioned you have aunts. Like, so were you all the ones that chose to be polygamous? Were you all kind of growing up together? And there was just like, I think you had told me.
No, because Kody and his family lived mostly in Utah. They did live in Wyoming for a little bit. So we'd go to church with them when I was really young, but they didn't ever live on the ranch that I grew up on. Okay. They lived like in a town just over, and they were in Wyoming for maybe like 3 or 4 years, maybe longer. And then they moved to Utah, and then the show started. And then once the show started, they were in Vegas, and they were kind of like, off on their world tour.
Yeah. So, okay. So tell us what it was like growing up in a polygamist family. I mean, I've seen a lot of it on your TikTok, which is certainly not glamorous. Like, what was it? I mean, you didn't know anything different, right? So you had no idea that kids were like going to school or that they were going to like New Kids on the Block concerts. You were like,
I know that that's the thing, but I still don't know who New Kids on the Block is. I mean, so let me paint a picture for you, right? So I'm my mom's oldest, and my other mom, she has a son just a couple weeks before I'm born. So there's a brother who's 13 days older than me. And so we're kind of like twins. And then my other mom has another kid from a previous marriage. So there's 3 kids. And then maybe 18 months later, about 2 years later, they have 2 more kids. So now there's 5 of us, and the oldest is 5. And then 2 years later, there's 7 of us. And then 2 years later, there's 9 of us.
Wow.
And then 2 years later, and it just keeps growing. Right. So, and we're living in these really tiny, like 3-bedroom rundown trailers.
Wow. So you didn't have any money. You know, I always have this idea because
we're dirt poor. We're dirt poor, like really, really poor. We'd either wouldn't have we wouldn't use like gas for the furnace for heat in the winter, or we just turn it down really low to like the 50s because we just couldn't afford gas, right? We use a lot of wood stoves.
What is the Mormon belief? Like, what is the AUB belief? Like, God will provide? You know what I mean? Like, because I hear that
Yeah, well, it's more like this is supposed to be hard,
Ah,
right?
okay.
So what
Okay.
this life is it's the refiner's fire, right?
Wow.
This life is the life where you get to prove that you deserve to live with God. And one of the ways that you prove that is by not complaining when things are hard. So bad things, if your life is difficult and challenging, well, that's just good. That's actually why they say that you're supposed to live polygamy, right? So they'll straight up tell you, hey, polygamy is going to be difficult. It's going to make you feel angry. It's going to make you feel all of these feelings. That's the point. It's supposed to be difficult because that difficulty, it's sort of this weird bastardization of something that is true, right? Like what is true in the world is that when you do challenging things, you do get better, right? Like you can push yourself and then things, but also there's sort of like this limit, there's like this limit there, there's this element of choice. And that also
Yeah.
can be twisted to really manipulate people to say, hey, it doesn't matter that your life is really difficult right now. That's supposed to be that way.
Totally.
God's pleased
Totally.
with you.
Yeah. 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 You see that in many parallels in religions. I was raised Catholic. There's things in, penance and sacrifice and all these things, that are and things to make you feel guilty. And I'm completely the opposite. I don't believe God is a punishing God. Now you can interpret it different ways you want in the Bible, but it is an interpretation.
Yeah.
And I think that life is meant to be fun and easy. And I think God has a
I
sense of
can't
humor.
imagine becoming all powerful. Like if there's a God,
Yeah.
like
Right?
if there is a God and that God is all powerful, I can't imagine that God likes punishing humans.
Yeah.
Like I can't imagine I imagine that God looks at humans the way that I look at like a 3-year-old. And when I look at a 3-year-old, even if that 3-year-old is being so obnoxious, like even if that 3-year-old is being the absolute worst 3-year-old that is possibly exists, I'm just looking at that 3-year-old and I'm like, oh, you're a kid. You're just a little kid. Like I there's no, I don't want to like the idea that you would want to punish a child. Like,
I know.
what are you?
Yeah. Wow. So Ben, so you grow up really poor. I mean, you must have been hungry at times. You're obviously cold at times, and your parents believe they are doing what
Yeah,
is
they believe
best.
that
Like
they
what's going to
are
get them to
so
heaven.
so they believe that they are securing. So the leader of the AUB, his name's Owen Allred at the time. He comes up to Wyoming and he's like, hey, he looks at my parents' ranch and he's like, hey, this is going to be a place of refuge for the saints, for the righteous people in the calamities of the last days, right? Because there's also a big apocalyptic streak in Mormonism and
Sure.
especially in fundamentalists, right? So the world's about to end. And when it does end, the righteous people are going to need a place to flee to be safe. And Owen's like, it's going to be this spot. And so my family interprets that as, okay, we gotta make this ranch we got to get as much land as we possibly can. The problem is that the ranch doesn't make money, right? Like it's not like a great, it's not like a gold mine, you
Yeah.
know? And so in order to subsidize the ranch in the early 90s, they start a bakery. They start a bakery called Country Bakery. And the idea is that it's actually my grandma Cheryl's idea. So we've met Cheryl in the Sister Wives show. That's Janelle's mom. They start this bakery and because it's pretty close, the ranch is pretty close to Yellowstone National Park,
And
right?
in
And
a bizarre twist, Janelle's mom marries your grandfather.
yeah, which is weird.
It's
Yeah.
I am always like
I
always blown by this whole thing because Janelle was married to Meri's brother. They divorce. Somewhere in the timeline, Janelle's mother marries your grandfather, and
yeah,
then Janelle marries Kody. I mean, I
yeah.
guess technically no one's blood, but it
It's
seems
weird. It's weird. It's
weird.
weird. And it was weird when I learned, I don't remember when I learned that. I think I was probably a teenager when that clicked, when I was like, I think I must have like heard Janelle call Cheryl mom. And I was like, oh, what? And it was even weird to me then.
Right.
But that's that's pretty on brand for Mormons, right? Like Mormons there's a lot of intermarrying. There's a lot of because it's this insular community, right?
Yeah.
And we are the righteous ones and
Sure.
everyone else is not. And so,
There's a level of incest in so many communities. I don't care. In so many countries, in so many different religions, there's this level of incest, right? I'm not saying that's right, but I'm just saying
there's just this level of you kind of you keep it in the family,
I mean, the royal families used to marry their second and third cousins for a very long time.
Right.
So
for hundreds of years, the richest people in the world were marrying
very
their
inbred everywhere.
Yeah. So not a great idea.
So she's the one that's kind of the entrepreneur a little bit and says,
yeah, okay. So she sees this opportunity, right? Because Yellowstone National Park is right there. And Yellowstone National Park gets thousands of visitors every year. And so they're like, well, we'll start a bakery. It'll be an all natural, country bakery. Wow. And we'll make bread and we'll deliver it to the park. And when they first start doing that, they hire people from the outside to come and work. So they hire people from the town, and it's what we would call Gentiles, right? Like people who are not part of our faith. They come onto the ranch, and I'm very young at this point. I'm probably 5-6 years old.
Okay.
And they start to get concerned about the impact that those people coming from the outside world will have on you guys,
right?
On us, right? What if we see? I mean, one of the girls, I don't know if you know this or not, but some people out here are wearing tank tops and they show their shoulders and their clavicles for everyone to see. And this girl was one of them. And so she's just parading around, strutting her shoulders. Wow. What impact will that have on the minds of our young, impressionable children? So we can't have her on this thing anymore. So they let all of those people go. And then they're like, well, we gotta have workers. And it turns out that there's a whole supply of young kids who aren't going to school. We're being homeschooled, but the great thing about homeschool is you can do that whenever you want. And so it can sort of organize itself around the bakery schedule. So when I'm 8 years old, I start working in the bakery. Wow. And when I'm 8, it's not like I'm working 20 hours or I'm doing the things that an 8-year-old would do, right? I'm
picking things up, sweeping.
I'm picking things up. I'm sweeping. I do end up using the slicer as an 8-year-old, and I chop my finger up. And so I get pretty injured, but that's okay because, Grandma Cheryl used to be a nurse or was a nurse or something. So she doctors me up. We don't have to go to the hospital, which is actually good because the hospitals in the town are very prejudiced against us. They might intentionally hurt us. So we're not going to go there.
No, wait a minute. Was Child Protective Services ever called on you guys or
yes. At least I know at least one time, but Child Protective, I mean, as an adult now, there's a part of me that's it would have been really great if the system could have picked me up. And I was afraid of that as a child, right? I was trained as a child to be really distrustful of all that. And we were actually growing up, I was very scared that they were going to come. As an adult now, knowing there's no, it's almost impossible to take kids away from their parents. Arguably it should be easier. But there's just, we have the level of fear that I had as a child that was going to happen was not, but they did. I mean, they came out, but we were pretty good at being sneaky, right? The other thing that would happen is that there were state inspectors who would come out and check out the bakery. And I was just trained when we would watch, because we knew kind of the days that they'd come. And so someone would be stationed up to watch when they started driving down. And because we're out, right? So there's a big dirt road that they have to drive. So we got plenty of warning. And so on the days when the inspector was supposed to come, I'd be there working. And then we'd get a phone call. Hey, the inspector's on his way. And I'd duck out the back, sneak around up. I mean, I was very sneaky. It was actually kind of fun, right? It's oh my gosh, we're
dodging the authorities.
Right.
So wait a minute. Okay, so were you ever educated in any way? I mean, this is always the thing I think about homeschool, right? Is it's always a challenge, right? Did you ever like get any education or it was
So
who
I
taught
read a
you?
lot. So I don't ever remember learning how to read. I learned how to read by watching my mom teach my older brother how to read.
Okay.
And so I just always was very curious. And honestly, like now that I've done some therapy, I would also say that I used reading as a way to dissociate. Like
Oh, sure.
it was a way to escape a pretty shitty world. And so it ranged, right? Like we would have sometimes, because it's my mom teaching, right? And my mom is the teacher. She's done a little bit of college. She graduated high school, and we would have like classes, but there are 11 kids. There are 8 kids, right? There's like, yeah, we did a co-op for a little while where we sort of would meet with some of the other, you know, we kind of group together with some of the other families, and we do like a co-op education. But again, it's like the moms of the group, and they're getting together. And so like we'll read a textbook together and then we'll work on something. Or
Yeah.
the example that I like to use is that by the time I got into like, high school age, there was very little, it was really just self-directed. So it was basically like my mom gave me, like, for my math, she was like, look, it's got to learn math. Here's an algebra 2 textbook, go read it. And if you have questions, come talk to me. And what I learned is that the answers to algebra 2 are actually in the back of the book,
Awesome. So
which is great. And if I'm going to be totally real, I've used that more than I've used algebra 2 in my life,
yeah,
because the
like,
answers are usually in the back of the book.
yes. Or now on Google,
Or now on Google.
Okay, there's this fantasy, and I think part of it is a little bit Sister Wives. There's been many other super religious shows, the Duggars, but there's this idea, I think, that, oh, a guy with 3 wives, it's like hot, they're all hooking up. Like it's okay. Was that your experience? Like, was your dad in love with all the wives? Was it
No.
okay?
No, in fact, I laugh about that so much, because that assumes a level of sex positivity that is not present
All in the
in these Puritan cultures at all.
Yeah, they're not
You
like
think
getting
that
down with
anyone,
yeah.
they're not enjoying sex in these Puritan cultures. They think it's dirty and only for procreation.
Damn.
Right. So I grew up being taught something called the higher law of chastity.
I
And the
bet.
higher law of chastity is as fun as it sounds. And it's that you should only have sex to make babies.
Oh,
In fact, I remember once the prophet of the AUB, this was later, this wasn't after Owen, this was a dude named Lemoyne Jensen, which is the best polygamous name ever. That is the most polygamous.
Lemoyne Jensen is awesome. Yes.
That is
Lemoyne.
peak polygamy. And he gave a conference talk once where he told everyone that, which again, the level of weirdness here, like that someone would in a public gathering, in a public religious gathering, that this would even come up. But he gave this talk, and he talked about how it would be wrong, it would be sinful. He was basically chastising the men in the audience for having sex with their wives in the shower, because if they did that, then they might feel feelings of lust while they were having sex. And if you feel lustful while you're having sex, then it's a sin. So if you enjoy having sex while you are having sex,
wow.
it is.
They really want to take the pleasure out of everything in your
Everything.
life. Wow, fuck.
Everything has to suck, even sex. Like that's such a great point, because like the one thing you think that you might get as a polygamist is, hey, at least I get to bang a lot of chicks.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, you would think so. But actually,
If you feel like this is good, banging these chicks, you're wrong.
right, you're wrong. You're immediately, Satan just slips in there and he can take over that baby.
So, okay, so this explains so much. I mean, were your mom and was your dad like always in a bad mood? Were they always mean?
Oh,
Like,
100%. Yeah.
okay, yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
they were
Like,
always
actually,
grumpy. They were always upset. They were always stressed. I mean, like,
oh,
and you know, you think about like, and the tragedy there is that all of those feelings then got
they're taking out on
just,
you all.
they got taken
They're
out on the kids,
projected. They're
right
projected.
there. So it's all of these. It's I've done enough therapy now that I can sort of see, I can see the big pattern. I can see what causes everything. And what I've realized is that there's just so much pain and trauma and discomfort in these humans' bodies, right? Their physical, the physical existence of my parents is awful. They live in literally the last time that I was home, this was like a year ago. I was visiting my mom. I'm in her trailer. She lives in what's called a polygamist double wide, which is 2 trailers that get pushed together and then you knock the inside walls out and you put something over. So it's not even like a real, it's just like you just plig rig it, right?
Okay.
And so she's living in this, and there's leaks from the ceiling. There's black mold growing in the ceiling. There's a literal hole in the floor because the floor has broken, and you can, it's a hole. Like and there's like, you got to walk around the hole. It's they're eating, you know, they're not eating great food. They're working all of the time.
To this day, your
this
parents
day.
and your mom. Wow.
Yeah, to this day,
Well, okay,
right?
I
It's
was
still
going to ask.
happening.
I was like, oh well, maybe I have this fantasy that like the bakery was like super successful at Yellowstone. Like, okay, no.
I mean, they still do, right? They still do deliver that stuff to Yellowstone. It's
wow.
And it's still made by children. And so, I mean, that's all still happening right now. But yeah, it's never been, I mean, how do you measure success, right? Like, I mean, my dad has 16 kids and he's able to mostly feed and provide for them, but also he has exploited all of them. I did the math once, because I wrote a short story that you can buy. It's called My Dad Still Owes Me a Pig. And that's a joke, right? Because when I first got into the way that they hooked me, the way that they got me working at the very beginning when I was 8, is that they told me that if I worked, that I could get a pet pig. And I didn't want a pet pig. I wanted a pet dog, but I was like, a pig will be fine. Like, that's
sure,
dog-like.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it'd be sweet.
And so I've told people for a long time that my dad still owes me a pig, and that's true. But I've also done the math, because I know roughly how many hours I work as a unpaid or underpaid child. And so my dad owes me a pig, but he also owes me $185,000 in back wages.
Wow.
So, like, I mean, the bakery did okay. Why? Well, because at least $185,000 of labor costs were absorbed by me and my body.
How did you even get out? Like, I mean, it's amazing you have the self-awareness that you have. Like, what was the moment? Who was the person? What was the book? What was it?
So I'm very lucky. And there are a couple of ways that I'm very lucky. The first thing is that I've always been just really curious and really smart. So I've always been reading, and at one point, and this is something I like to credit my mom for. My parents didn't give me a lot, especially my dad. But one of the things that my mom did give me is that at one point, my dad wanted to control how much, like, he wanted to tell me that I could only read books that he had read and approved. And my mom was like, look, Scott, like, if you do that, you don't read any books. So he won't ever read anything. So that's impossible. We can't do that. So my mom would take me to the library. She would let me check out basically anything that I wanted to. And so I just read a bunch. And so what that did is that meant that my world was always a little bit bigger than the world that I was in, right? So the world that I was in was this big, but because I was always reading, my world was just a little bit bigger than that. And because my world was a little bit bigger and because I was reading a lot, my parents were like, okay, well, how can we use this to our advantage? And they were like, well, we want Ben to go to law school and become a lawyer, because then he can become a lawyer for the community, right? He can kind of like protect us. And when that's a little gangster. That's a little Sopranos, like, let's get a lawyer in the family. Like, should have potentially been a little bit of a red flag. Like, why?
Yeah.
Why do we feel like we need someone who's blood related who knows the law? What are we doing? Anyway, I didn't think that. So they're like, okay, we're going to send you to college. And so they sent me to like an alt-right liberal arts college in Southern Utah. And it was very conservative and very Mormon. It was mostly LDS Mormon though. So that sort of widened my world a little bit more. So I'd been raised in this polygamist world. Now I'm kind of in this LDS world that's just a little bit bigger. And I like it. Like,
oh my God.
It's
yeah, because
so
there
much
must have been a
nicer.
lot of rebels. There had to have been a lot of rebels. Like,
Yeah.
Nobody acts worse than someone that, I don't care what they say, religious, or they preach. Anybody that has this doctrine, you see it in politics, you see it in religion, you see it in everything, but when don't do this, they're always the ones partying and watching a ton of porn. So, or trying to hook up with underage kids, it's always like one of those. So
you're always kind of like, you're when you protest holiness,
always.
The people who are the most publicly righteous are the most privately debauched, right?
Yes.
And I actually think, like, now as an adult who's been out in this world and sort of gets it now, like, I would say there's not wickedness and righteousness aren't things, right? Wickedness and righteousness are ways that we slice and dice our society to create difference and division.
Yeah.
And to really try to make certain groups better than other groups.
I agree.
And nobody's better or worse. We're all just human. And what really worked for me, right? So coming out, the thing that really, because I had to leave in stages, right? So like I left the compound to go to school in 2007.
Okay.
2007 to 2010, so 3 years, I still believed the sect. I was still like in the belief system of the AUB, but I was living in this slightly wider world. And what eventually pushed me out of that, like pushed me from the polygamous world into the LDS world, was the doctrine of racism, right? So in the AUB, what I told you earlier about this idea that if you're Black, you can't have the priesthood, right? Which is this magical made up thing that only special people get. But in the AUB, they still believe that, right? The only unpardonable sin that I could ever commit that would mean that I could not be forgiven and welcomed back into the AUB is if I had sex with a Black person. If I did that, that would fundamentally taint my seed and I would be impure, and I could still be like a servant, but I could not repent from that. That will permanently taint me. And
so your wife is Black, right? Or Hispanic?
So I exclusively date Black women.
Why not? Go all out.
I have thoroughly tainted myself.
Good.
Right. And I say that as like, I try to find humor in it and I try to like make light of it, but I also want to acknowledge too, like, that's textbook white supremacy, right? Like, that is, I was, and that's sort of this dark underbelly that on Sister Wives, they're not like, oh, look, we're going to talk, like, isn't polygamy great? No, it's not. It's abusive to children and women, and it's wildly white supremacist. And so that's what's really happening in that world. And when I was a little boy, I was probably, 5 or 6 years old. And because I'm reading a lot, I read about like the civil rights movement, and I read about the Martin Luther King Jr. And I even like, and I'm like, oh, this is pretty cool, right? This seems like a legit thing that maybe we shouldn't judge people based on, because I'm coming like as a child, I'm an outcast too, right? We're living in this community of LDS Mormons, and we're the weird polygamous Mormons, right? We're the minority. And so I know what that feels like. And so I'm like, why would I want to do that to another person? And I remember hearing my parents and my dad especially talking about that doctrine and like talking about it being real, and just feeling so sick and gross. Like I felt like this knot in my belly. And so when I'm at college, I get this opportunity to go to Uganda for a summer. So I go to Uganda for a summer, and I'm teaching like teacher development classes to some high school and elementary school teachers out there, which is hilarious because I've never been to high school or elementary school. And I'm surrounded by all of these beautiful humans, and I feel the weight of my own internal white supremacy. And I'm like, I can't do that. I don't, this is not God. I can't be in this space. And so that's kind of the first breaking point for me. And when that breaks, I decide to join the LDS Church, because the LDS Church at this point is the least racist version of Mormonism. And I haven't yet gotten to the point where I'm willing to question all of Mormonism.
Sure.
Right? I can only because Mormonism is a giant hole.
Yeah,
right?
it's like
huge, deep hole.
Sure.
And I'm down here on like level 9. So I can pull myself up to level 3, but that's kind of the first stage. And I'm LDS for about 5 years. And but as I'm LDS, I'm also starting to see parallels, right? I'm starting to see the ways in which this LDS church that I thought was different and better is actually very similar to this polygamous church. It's just it's a difference in kind and not in structure. So yeah, they do treat women better in the LDS church, but women don't have any actual authority in the LDS church. They're always dependent on what the leader, who is always a man, thinks. So yeah, they're treated better, but that's not because they have any more power. That's just because the men in charge have figured out that it is better to treat women better. Right?
Yeah. No, I think you're explaining it very well. Okay, so you have all these discoveries, right? And you eventually realize that you don't want to be a member of the Mormon church, period. Okay, how did that end with your family? And where is your family at today with you? Do you speak to them? Do you speak to your father? Are your 15 other siblings still in it? Have they followed you on TikTok? How is it?
So I don't know that any family members follow me on TikTok. I'm fairly, so like, again, for 7 generations, my family's been Mormon.
Yeah, huge.
And I'm not. And not only am I not, I'm very vocally not. And I'm like kick dirt in people's faces vocally not, right? Because part of what I'm trying to use my platform for is to talk more about the hidden parts, right? To give voice to the people that are victimized and abused and manipulated in this worldview that we don't talk a lot about because we want to pretend like we're nice and stuff. So yeah, I mean, I'm not super close to, most of my siblings are still polygamist. I'm not super close to very many of them.
Even though you guys are young. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh my God.
And that's sort of a difference between like I know that most of Kody's kids have decided not to.
Off it. So I think they say, yeah.
The majority, that credit for that to me is the show and really the exposure that they got to a wider world, right? So when Kody did that, after I went to college and left, my family was like, circle the wagons. We're going to really limit and again, bite. We're going to control their behavior by controlling the information and the thoughts that they think.
Well, were
So
they super threatened? Like, okay, so the Sister Wives started in 2010, sort of as this documentary. We're going to kind of look at this guy. He's courting this fourth wife. Was your dad speaking to Kody at that point? Like, I mean,
yeah, my dad was fully in support of the show when it started.
Wow.
I don't know where he's at now, but I think that, I mean, because again, and this was Kody's thought, I think, going into it too. They believe that polygamy is the best.
Yeah, love should be multiplied. Yeah,
right? Love should be multiplied. So yeah, he was thrilled. He thought that it was going to be really important in like spreading the the truth of polygamy. And I think what nobody realized is that it was going to do exactly that. It was going to tell the truth about polygamy. It's just the truth about polygamy wasn't what they were saying. It's what everyone was seeing.
Yeah.
Right. So everyone saw. I've watched the first season. I'm two episodes into season 2. You can see it.
Wait, you can see what from your?
You can see the truth of what polygamy does to people. You can see the truth of. I mean, what I think it does is it teaches you not to listen to yourself, to abandon yourself, and to live life in an unnecessarily difficult way. So it pushes you to do things that are not natural to you, that you would not normally do, and that you would, if you thought about what you want in your life, you would never do, but you would do those things anyway. Why? Because you've been taught since you were very small, that you're bad, and that your feelings are bad, and that anything that is not God is the devil trying to tempt you. And so jealousy, anger, any of those feelings are the devil. Don't listen to them. When actually what those feelings are is your nervous system telling you that something is wrong.
What a beautiful way to say it, because I don't have any of the religious context, but when I watch season 1 and season 2, I look at 3 women, meaning Janelle, Meri, and Christine, as realizing that their husband is falling in love for the first time with another person, and everything in their bodies, because they break down, they cry, they have these emotional reactions, are telling them that it is the end, because this man has found the woman that he is going to be in love with. But to your point, whether they do it for sincerity, and by the way, they say that it was sincere, that they stuck with Kody. At least, Meri was just on my show. She says that it was sincere. They stay with him, knowing and seeing him fall in love with another person. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's because what they've been taught. So this is what Mormonism taught me, right? What Mormonism taught me was, don't listen to your body.
Right.
Listen to what the prophet tells you. Right. So don't listen to and so most of the work that I've done in therapy, the thing that's crazy to me about, and I don't know that anyone else has ever had this realization in therapy, but the big realization that I had in therapy was, oh, I can just trust myself.
Oh my God, Ben, I went to therapy years ago for basically disordered eating, right? I was a yo-yo dieter for years. I went on my first diet when I was 12. I hated my body. I almost gave up working in entertainment because of what people said about my body. And of course, food, when you overeat, food is masking something else. For me, it was grief, because my dad died when I was 14, and we mourned for 2 weeks, and then that was it. Like, don't talk about it. We're moving on. That's it. So then it comes up, right? Because in therapy, my therapist always said, what you resist persists. So whatever happened in your childhood, abuse, good things, bad, if you try to run from it, it will show up all the time.
Yep.
So, but when I walked in, initially, I thought I was being treated for this ongoing, binge eating disorder. And one of the first things she said to me was, you will be able to trust yourself with all food. And I was like, there's no way. There's no way. And then isn't that the beauty of a good therapist is truly all the answers are within you. They're
It's
all
all
there.
right. This vessel that I'm in, right,
All
is
there.
brilliant.
Yeah.
It knows exactly when someone's manipulating it. It knows exactly when someone is loving it. It knows all of those things. And because I was raised in a, like, why do people create cults, right? Why do people do that?
Control. It's
So they can
control.
control
Yeah.
other humans,
Right.
right? We know that. We know that that's why they do it. And so I was raised in a worldview, right? We are humans. We run in fictitious worlds, right? We run make-believe operating systems. That's how our brain works. And so I was raised, and everyone who was raised Mormon was raised in an operating system that taught you, hey, don't really listen to yourself. Listen to the person in charge. And who's the person in charge? That person, right? And so you take that, and that, to me, that's the most evil thing you can do to a human, to steal their innate sense of their power and their choice, and to remove that and to put it onto someone else and to say, you got to do whatever this person tells you to do. That's the most egregious thing that you can do to another human, because we are all sovereign. We are all our own being. And yeah, we have to take into account other people. We got to be set, like, we don't want to step on other people's toes, but nobody gets to tell me what reality is, or what I am the king of my jungle, and nobody else gets to do that. And we have systematically, through so many different, not just Mormonism, but through so many different systems in our world, we have stripped people of that. And that's disgusting. That's a gross thing to do to a person. And then you see the results of that that's what you see in Sister Wives, right? Is you see people trying to justify, okay, well, I know that this thing is true, and so I have to somehow justify that this thing is true, and that my body feels so bad right now.
Okay, what is your reaction watching the show? You're only 2 seasons in. You put this out on your TikTok, and you said, I'm going to watch for the very first time. And as somebody that is, a former Mormon and also, attached to this family, I'm going to give you my true feelings. So tell me how you're feeling about it, because you have a lot of hot takes. You basically say you don't think any of these men can be good fathers to 16 kids.
No, yeah.
They can't.
I don't think you can be. Yeah, I mean, my take so far is kind of what I anticipated it would be, which is, this is a 10-year train wreck happening in slow motion, right? This is what I'm trying to do, though, is because I don't think it's just about my family, and I don't think it's just about Kody. I think the real story that I think is more interesting is that there's this thing in America called Mormonism. And Mormonism gets people to do really, really weird shit. And so I'm less interested in, like, when I watch it and I'm trying to give what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to help people understand that this isn't about Kody being an asshole. This isn't about, any of the wives being codependent or any. Are those things true? Possible, right? Like, are there dysfunctions in my family and in the broader world? 100%. Why are those dysfunctions there? What happened that made those people that way? And what happened is that there was a cult that was allowed to run unchecked in America, and has been allowed to pass itself off and to try to pass itself off as a religion, when it's not. It's a cult. And it claims things that are demonstrably untrue, right? The origin story of Mormonism is a dude had a hat and he put a rock in it and he looked at it and then he translated a book. That's not true. That is not only is that not true, that is a lie that was told to manipulate and abuse and extort people. And so that has continued, the effects of that lie have continued to just unfold over almost 200 years now.
Do you think, I mean, now you're only 2 seasons in, so like, I don't want to spoil it for you, although I guess it's all out there, but I mean, they've all come out, like Kody's come out and said polygamy doesn't work. All the women have come out. I mean, Janelle's like bet $1,000 publicly he'll never remarry. They're all like done with polygamy. So in
Yeah.
a way, I mean, hasn't TLC and this show kind of proven your point and almost like shown people, look, this is 14 years and this didn't work. And now it's at the point none of these people like each other, speak to each
I mean,
other.
when I actually think that, like, to me, if you really like, the real interesting story isn't about what has happened up until now. I think that the real Sister Wives story is, okay, this was all prelude. This was all Janelle, Meri, and Christine, the Sister Wives, right? Like, from a story perspective, it's wild to me that, like, it's called Sister Wives. So that would suggest that the main characters of the story are the Sister Wives. The main character of the story has always been Kody, right?
Yeah,
From the first episode.
totally. It's following him. We're
following him. He's
Yeah.
narrating, like, all of that. I think the more interesting story now is, okay, what do Christine and Meri and Janelle do now that they've left, now that they're free, right? Up until now, this has all been prelude of them unpacking and coming out. Because, I mean, to me, the hilarious irony of the Sister Wives show is that they started it to try to show the world how awesome polygamy is, and now
None of the
did
shows
the
do.
exact opposite.
Because they have Seeking Sister Wife, they have Seeking Sister Husband now, so now they've got women that want to take on multiple male husbands. But I mean, the bottom line is, in a way, I almost feel like TLC is kind of helping and on your side in a sense, because none of it works. It never works over and over and over. And of course, television, if there's a crack in your relationship, in any relationship, then you put it on TV. And then you've got strangers weighing in. I mean, nothing will break you quicker than that, because you got to be really solid to take a lot of people's opinions. But I this idea of what they're going to do next.
I'm interested in that too. And I would also say, like, because I don't know that I'm ready to give TLC credit for that, because I don't think that TLC went into this saying, how can we expose the world of Mormon polygamy in a way that will be the most beneficial for the true victims of that, which is the thousands of children who are abused and neglected in that world. So if TLC were to come around and say, you know what, we've decided to donate 10% of all of the millions of dollars that we've made to organizations that are helping people leave polygamy, then I might say, yeah, TLC, you're really helping solve the problem. Up until without that, I think they're just capitalizing on the problem.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's a secondary thing. So tell me, what do you think is in store for those 3 women? I mean, they all seem to be entrepreneurs. Christine's married a guy that's the complete opposite of Kody. I mean, the guy's like a rocker at NASCAR, rodeoing, and she's probably having the best sex of her life. I think she's enjoying it now. What do you think?
I hope that they do what I've done, and what I think everyone who leaves the cult should do, which is go out and find yourself.
Yeah.
Who are you, right? For all of them, the world that they were in told them who they were and who they were supposed to be, and they tried to do that for decades. Now they haven't. And I think the most beautiful gift that I found leaving the cult was myself, right? Was realizing, like, oh, I'm not a bad person. I'm not an evil person. I just get to experience and to explore what it is that I like and what I don't like. And I get to, like, just discover myself.
Well, also, you're breaking the cycle for your kids because you have 3 children. I'm assuming they're not involved in Mormonism at all. And you're getting to, I mean, how was that? What was that like, becoming a father and looking, because, I'm a mom, that being a parent will hold a mirror up to what you went
Totally.
through, you know, because I mean,
Yeah.
that's all you know, right? You know how your parents parented. How's it
There
been?
have actually been so many moments in being a dad that have been really profoundly healing, where because you can't change the way that you were parented,
Right.
but you kind of can when you parent, like just as an example, right? Like I remember because we were so poor. And so I remember when I was a kid, when I would break things, it was a big because kids just break shit. We just
All
like
the
all
time.
the time. We break shit so much. It's
Yeah,
obnoxious.
my 3-year-old threw a car into our TV, you know, and like you know how like then it just like
Yeah.
doesn't shatter anymore, but like all the color has now seeped, you know, so it's like,
Yep.
oh, well, there's
Yeah.
$750 and he's 3, so what are you going to do? Like
Right.
he doesn't
Right.
know.
It's the worst. And I remember when I was a kid and I would even at
Yeah.
3, right? Like the rage that would come at, right? And so I remember, I remember when my oldest kid was like 3 or 4, she like dropped like she was like doing something, she knocked a glass and it fell down and it shattered. And it shattered. And right in the moment when it shattered, like I made eye contact with her, and suddenly I was her age, and I had broken something, and I could feel all of that. I could feel I could even feel the feelings that my whoever had disciplined me in that moment must have been, and I just felt it kind of like washing over me. It kind of like came up, and then it sort of settled. And then I went to her, I was like, "Are you okay? That was really loud." "Huh. It's okay. Things break." Right. And I just kind of like, I comforted her because she was obviously scared because something had just broken. It was really loud, you know? And I comforted her. And then I picked her up and I moved her over here. And I was like, "Hey, let's get you over here where it's safe." And then I picked up the glass and I cleaned it up. And it was no biggie. Right. That, that
That's
didn't,
huge, Ben.
that didn't
That's
have
huge.
to live in her. Right. I didn't have to give
Yeah.
that. I was like, oh, that just gets to be in me, and then it dies in me.
Wow. Ben, I mean, okay, where's your relationship at with your dad? Do you and your dad speak? I mean, this is
No,
amazing
we
what you're
don't.
doing. He does not, he
Yeah.
doesn't agree or see any of the light that you're bringing.
Yeah. So, I mean, this has been, it's been a journey, right? So uh, like therapy's the shit. I love it.
Yeah.
I've done it for a long time. And, about 2 years ago, I kind of got to the point where I sort of, I was reading this book called It Didn't Start With You, which is about generational trauma.
Sure.
And the gist of that book is that at some point in your healing journey, you have to heal your parent wound, right? Like you actually have to heal in the context of the people who wounded you, which
Mm.
doesn't necessarily mean start a new relationship with them. It just means like that's the thing, right? And so when I kind of got to that point, I was like, I sort of felt ready to go back and try to heal that wound. And I also felt like I wanted parents. It especially, and I don't know that I'm the best dad in the whole world, but I'm pretty great. And when I am being a dad to my kids, and there's a part of me that's like, man, it would be really nice to have this energy that I'm giving them coming at me from someone bigger than me, you know,
Yeah.
to feel what that feels like. And so I started to feel kind of like this longing for that. Um, and and so I was sort of in this space where I kind of wanted to try reconnecting and healing. And then I went to Burning Man for the first time. And while I was at Burning Man,
Oh
this was
boy.
in 22, which the absolute shit.
Were you riding
Oh
around nude on a bicycle?
my God. I eventually, yes.
Gets
This
nude at Burning
particular this particular
Man.
Burning Man actually culminated with me sitting naked in this little temple that I'd made out of rocks and a blanket. next to the ashes of the man after he burned down. And I was like butt ass naked. I had this like not this hat, but a different hat that had a one eye on it. And I was doing tarot readings for people when they'd come down to, and like, it was, I like went full Book of Mormon Burning Man prophet. It was rad. It was so much fun.
Hopefully on some sweet peyote.
Allegedly, there are no drugs at Burning Man.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
all right.
no drugs. I was going around. I was like, one try of the drugs, please. And nobody would help me out. Anyway, I'm at Burning Man, and Burning Man is the level of the variety of human expression that was available, right? Just all of the different ways that humans were playing with this thing called human and like expressing themselves was magical. I loved it. And I'm walking around and I'm like, literally, I'm falling in love with all of humanity. I'm like, everything about humanity is awesome. And then I start feeling really sad because I'm like, I'm looking at this easily the coolest place that I've ever been in my life. And I've been to some pretty cool places. And I'm like, I will never be here with my family. Like my family will never.
None of your siblings, you don't think? You don't know.
That was just kind of I mean, I would love it. I would love it. But just the sensation was like, this is the coolest place. I've found the coolest thing that I could possibly imagine. And I'm never going to be able to share this with anyone that I grew up with. Right. And so I'm feeling that. And I've been feeling this thing about my dad too. And I'm kind of feeling sad. I'm just walking around and, because it's Burning Man, I look up and there's this huge red sign in the distance. It's gigantic. And it just says free dad advice. And I'm like, perfect. That's exactly what I need is some free dad advice. So I walk up to the temple. I walk up to the tent that's next to it. And I like walk in and I'm like, hey, I'm here for the free dad advice. And there's this like 65-year-old burner lady who's sitting at this table and she's like, sweet, have a seat. So I sit down. I don't even know her name. We start talking and she's like, well, tell me what advice you need. Like, what's your problem? And I say, well, I don't really have any kind of relationship with my dad. And I feel the lack of that sometimes. I feel like the weight of going through life without a father. And I would like to have one, but I don't know if the payoff is going to be worth the effort. Right. Like, so I feel kind of stuck where I want to be able to invest in this relationship, but I don't know if it will be worth it. So I don't really know what to do. And she's like, well, are you ready for your advice? And I'm like, yes, I've told you my thing. Like, now give me my magical stuff. And she says, my advice is grow up, call your dad, tell him exactly what you just told me, and then tell him what's going on in your life and ask for his advice. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, it would never have occurred to me to just ask for what I want. That's a great idea. Right. And so I'm like thrilled. I'm like, sweet, I'll just do that. And I'll just leave. So I'm getting up to leave. And I'm like, thanks for the advice. That was really great. And she's like, hold on, tell me a little bit more about your dad. And so I say, well, he's a Mormon polygamist man with 3 wives and 16 kids. And I'm really excited to call him after this gets over because I'm going to take your advice. And she's like, actually, I want to change my advice now.
Don't call him.
And she's like, you should probably give up.
She did.
And I'm like, she can sort of see me kind of like wilt. I'm kind of like, and she's like, look, she's like, you can do it. I would have said something different if I would have known. And I just want you to know, like, it's possible that your dad will not be able to show up for you in the way that you want him to. And so after I got back from Burning Man, I went out to lunch with my dad. I did exactly what I said. I told him that story. I told him what I wanted. We tried reconnecting for about 8 months, and where we would talk pretty regularly. And I sort of like welcomed him into my a little more intimate circle. And I was honest with him about what was challenging for me in my life. And I would ask for his advice. And he mostly gave really shitty advice and did not really show up in a way that felt safe or like how I wanted. And after a couple of months of that, like every once in a while he would do okay, but I would find myself coaching him a lot. And I was like, I'm not in this relationship to be your parent.
Yeah. And I'm sure they need parents,
I'm in this relationship for you to be my parent. And if you can't be my parent without me coaching you every step of the way, I'm actually not interested in that. And so like that was sort of sitting with me. And then so I've been doing comedy for 3 years. I started headlining about a year and a half ago. And that just means that I'm doing my own like hour show where I'm the person on the poster, right? I'm the ticket guy. And I had my very first, I'd headlined a couple of times, but I was doing my very first weekend where I was doing a back-to-back Friday, Saturday night show. I was really excited about it. And I told him beforehand, and I was like, first I invited him. I was like, hey, you can come to this show if you would like to.
Oh, sweet.
And he was like, no, I'm going to be, I think he was actually hanging out with Kody that weekend. He's like, I've got plans. And I was like, okay, that's fine. And then I was like, well, I would really appreciate it if you just could call me or text me before the shows to like wish me like good luck or something. And he was like, okay, yeah, I can do that. And so then Friday came around. It was before my show, no contact. Saturday, before my show, no contact. Sunday, he texts me and he's like, hey, sorry about missing the thing, but some people came into town and I just got distracted and tell me how they were. And at that point I was like, I kind of went back to the burner lady. And I was like, okay, I see it. You actually can't show up for me the way that I want you to. And I'm not going to continue to give you the opportunity to disappoint me. Mm-hmm. And so I had another conversation with him where I gave him a book called The Power of Showing Up, which is a great, fantastic book by Daniel Goleman about how to help create secure attachment in children. So I gave him that book and I was like, Dad, you should read this book. I'm not going to coach you on how to be my dad anymore. I'm officially disinviting you from this intimate circle that you've been in. You're now out. Go read this book, go to therapy, and don't talk to me, don't contact me, and we'll talk in a year. And in a year, we'll see where things are at. And so that was about 10 months ago.
Okay, so we don't know, right?
We don't know.
We don't know. We don't know.
We don't know. What I do know is that I'm glad I'm actually glad I took her advice the first time, because what that actually did is that changed something in me where before it felt like there was this like wound that was just would accept any kind of father energy. It was just like, look, I'm just need someone be a daddy. Just please, I need my daddy. Right. And what asking really clearly and specifically for exactly what I wanted from my dad, even though he couldn't give it to me, that asking, what that did is that showed me what my expectations and my boundaries are. And it also showed me what I wasn't willing to put up with.
Yeah.
And so I feel like now I'm in a place where I actually feel like it's still a bummer. It would still be great to have, a dad that I felt like I could trust and that could really hold space for me. I don't have that dad. And that's okay, because I know what I deserve in a father figure. Sure. And I'm either going to have that from him or maybe from someone else, or maybe I just get to give that to myself.
Yeah. And your kids.
My whole life.
Ben, I have a couple last questions for you. One, have you connected with your cousins, meaning the cousins on Sister Wives, all of Janelle's kids, Meri's child, Christine's? They seem like they've lived the most, I guess, similar situation. Are you close with any of them?
We hang out at like family reunions. We're kind of like the crew. So there's been a bunch of us now. Most of the extended family in my generation are no longer religious.
Yeah. That's why I'm saying, like, I
And
wondered if they've all connected with you because it doesn't seem like any of them are religious. Some are gay, some are trans. I mean,
yeah,
they're really quite out there. And I think the show obviously has provided a whole different thing. I mean, they're on Patreon, they're on YouTube's making money, which is great. They should, you
oh,
know,
100% they should.
cash
Yeah,
in.
I mean, so whenever I've connected with them, like at weddings or anything, I've always really enjoy my relationships with all of them. I don't feel like I'm particularly close with hardly anyone in my family.
Mm,
And I sort of like what I've sort of realized about that is that I think that in some ways it's easier when you've left a toxic family culture to when you're around other people from that family, you can sort of fall into, it's kind of just easier to be your old self, even if you're both trying to heal. And so I wonder sometimes if it's easier to heal outside of the context of family,
mm.
when family has kind of been the place where you've been maybe the most wounded. It's just easier for me to be not who I was as a kid when I'm with people who never knew me that way.
Yeah. 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 I mean, maybe you guys never reconnect, or maybe, you do, because it seems like I would think that they would have a lot of similar things to say to you, you know?
I would imagine that we're probably, and in the conversations that we've had, like we've been on on similar pages. I think that it's just like they've got their lives and I've got my
Yeah.
life, and we're out living life.
And you
And
haven't
there's a
heard
lot of
from
us.
no one said anything to you about your TikToks, like because you put it out there, you're going to watch the shows. You haven't heard from anybody. I know I asked that because I know certainly Meri and Janelle and Christine, I think have said over the years, or at least their kids have said that the kids say that they're not wild about them doing these YouTubes and things like that, but
Yeah.
they understand it's their story. So I didn't know if you'd heard from anyone in the family.
Yeah, no one has talked to me about it, but also no one has talked to me about any of any of those of anything as I've left. Right. So, and I think that, I think that in some, I think that the people who are probably still devout are maybe afraid to talk to me because I'm not, and I might seduce them, which I probably would.
Uh,
But yeah, no one's really been like, hey, here's what I think about your content.
I mean, were you close with Garrison at all? I wonder how much the show affected his mental health. I mean, certainly his sister came out and said that, he was very much online and comparing himself to other people. Did you guys grow up together? Do you think?
No, Garrison was in a kind of a different age group. So I mean, I knew him, but we were never close. I do think that, like, the mental health is something that's so tricky. It's so delicate already. And I don't imagine that having your entire childhood made public without your consent was great. I can't imagine that was a healthy thing for anyone, really.
Ben, I have to imagine, I want you to promote your book, promote your TikTok. And I have to imagine people that have come from religious groups, cults, Mormonism, have probably been reaching out to you left and right, to say, hey, me too. I've been through something similar.
That's been kind of fun. It's been, so a lot of what's funny is that the ex-Mormon journey is similar to a lot of like ex-evangelicals or ex-Catholics or anyone who was raised in a really
Orthodox Jewish. I mean, if you're raised hardcore in some of these religious groups, I mean, I know in my own, there's division in my own family there's some people that want to go back to Vatican II Catholicism, and they've homeschooled their kids, and they believe that letting those children go to school, they are teaching, anti-Christian values, and they are destroying I mean, I see it in my own family. So I know people all across this country, and I don't know, sometimes I actually think we're getting more religious as a society.
Yeah, I'm
And
concerned about that too.
no, people are very religious now, very spiritual, very, because I mean, we all don't know, right? So I think there's comfort in that. But I almost think sometimes like maybe more people want to be polygamous. I don't
You
know.
know, I was I was accosted recently at the park by, like, I took my kids out to the park and they're playing. I'm hanging out with my dog, and there's this whole group of people. They're all wearing matching shirts at like a pavilion, right? And I'm like, oh, this is probably like a family reunion or something.
Yeah.
And then one dude like kind of makes his way over to me, and he starts talking to me about my dog, and so we start talking dogs and stuff. And then I ask him, like, what's this group? Is this a family reunion? He's like, oh no, this is a church. And I was like, oh, okay. I know why you're here. I know why you want to talk. To me, I'm I'm uh I'm prey, right? I'm a possibility. And so he's like, what do you think about religion? And I'm like,
Oh, Lord. You got
I'm
4
like,
hours? I'm like,
oh boy, buddy. And I know where he's going, right? With that question, right? That's a question that's designed to give him an opportunity to tell me how I should believe what he believes.
yeah.
And so I just tell him the truth, which is, this is what I believe. I believe that there is more to our reality than we can understand, and that we are able to tap into a sense of what is bigger than us, but nobody really understands what that is, right? I was watching Pete Holmes, who's another comic who's very vocal in his belief in God. And he quotes actually I think the band manager for AC/DC, where he says that God is the name of the blanket that we throw over the shape of the mystery to give it shape, right? My favorite is, at one point, there's a story about the Buddha where his disciples are coming to him, and they're talking to him about all the different religions. And he says, look, it's really important that you understand this, that my teachings are just a finger pointing at the moon, but it would be foolish to ever mistake a finger for what it's pointing at. And so I really believe that there is divinity, that there is sacred, right? That there is this realm of being that we would call God. And I think that my view of God is big and expansive, and it includes all of the different paths and all of the different ways that humans have for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, that we've walked on this planet, that we've tried to understand our connection to that thing. And I think what that thing probably really is just the totality of existence. That the totality of existence is, and that we are part of the totality of existence, and that in that we can feel and be connected to that. So I love that about humans. And I think that the ways that we, in all different cultures all over the world, the different trappings that we've put on religion, the different ways that we've talked about God, to me, it's artistic. It's beautiful. All of the different ways that we've found to point at the moon. And I think that it would be incredibly foolish of all of us to think that there's one right way to point at the moon.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's the fucking moon.
Right. Yeah. Ben, I mean, what a great place to leave it. Thank you so much for coming on here. You're doing amazing work. If people are curious about the Mormon cult, And, and just your take, a whole different take that we haven't seen on the Sister Wives series, which is now going to be going into its 19th season. Ben's going to be covering it all on the Fresh King Benjamin on your TikTok. And the book is My Dad Still Owes Me.
The book is, my dad, it's a little short, so it's My Dad Still Owes Me a Pig, and that's on my website, thefreshkingbenjamin.com, or you can also find it on my TikTok. And I'm on YouTube, Instagram, all as the Fresh King Benjamin across the board. And then if you happen to have any listeners who are like local to Salt Lake, they should check me out because I'm doing shows constantly. I headline the Wise Guys in Salt Lake about once a month. And I've recently started just up a couple of like other shows to kind of help the local comedy community. So if people are Salt Lake and they want to like connect with me over comedy that's maybe not polygamous, they should follow me there too.
Awesome. Ben, thank you so much for coming on. Truly.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.